Welcome, everyone. As you're joining us, getting settled, my name is Matt Conrad. I'm the Senior Content Manager at Scholarship America, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to our second Partner Convening webinar, Unlocking Individual Philanthropy for Scholarship Support, with a specific focus on donor-advised funds. A lot of people don't know, but donor-advised funds are a real natural match for scholarship funding, despite some misconceptions, which we will clear up with our panel of experts today. In today's session, we're going to look at how DAFs and individual philanthropy can be leveraged to launch and to support scholarship programs, to cover administrative fees, and build strategic partnerships between funders and program administrators. Um, at Scholarship America, we receive quite a few DAF gifts. Since 2019, we've received more than 2,000 gifts, everything from $5 gifts to $100,000 gifts through donor advised funds. And our panel today is going to discuss the growth of that DAF scholarship support, as well as how we can work together to maximize the impact of individual donors. I want to start by thanking Imaginable Futures for their sponsorship of today's webinar. And to welcome Jenn Clark, who is our moderator today. Jenn is the lead of strategic communications for Imaginable Futures US team. She will tell you a little bit more about their organization. They do amazing work, particularly in the realm of college students who are also parents. And so with that, I will turn things over to Jenn. Please make sure if you're attending, make sure you are muted. And we will kick things off. Jenn, over to you.
Thank you so much, Matt. Hi, everybody. I'm Jenn Clark. And although I'm moderating, I'm mostly here to learn from these four incredible DAF experts that we have gathered here today. And they have deep insights into an area that's just reshaping philanthropic giving in the US, donor advised funds. At Imaginable Futures, we support a range of efforts to improve the success of the 1 in 5 college students in the US who are parents. And what does that have to do with donor advised funds and scholarship support? Most student parents struggle to afford college and basic living expenses for their families while they go to school, and they often slip through the cracks of institutional supports that exist to help other students, many who don't have kids, access college. Scholarship America has been doing really great work to shine a light on the types of financial barriers today's students are facing. And we know that individual donors can be powerful partners in unlocking some more of the supports that can help more students get the education they need to thrive. So, who we'll be hearing from today is a really rock star cast. First, Fernando Gonzalez leads development efforts at the National Philanthropic Trust, one of the largest providers of donor advised funds globally. He works closely with donors, advisors, and nonprofit partners to expand philanthropic access and help individuals translate charitable intent into sustained impact. Then we also have Ashley Hezel, who oversees operational strategy at the Pittsburgh Community Foundation, supporting donors in creating and administering scholarship funds that reflect local priorities. Her work bridges donor vision, compliance, and community-centered impact with a strong focus on student access and success. Then we have Linda Shak, who's the Director of Philanthropic Strategies at Fidelity Charitable, where she partners with donors and advisors to design thoughtful giving strategies using donor advised funds. With a background in social work, she brings a donor and beneficiary centered lens to philanthropy, including education, emergency aid, and systems level change. And then last but not least, we have Madeline Tomseth, who is a strategic impact partner at Niveau Philanthropy and an executive coach dedicated to dismantling barriers that limit opportunity. Drawing on experience from corporate family office leadership to entrepreneurial ventures, Madeline now serves as coach, donor, volunteer, and consultant across the nonprofit and social enterprise sectors, committed to collaborative, community-driven approaches to lasting impact. So, given the four very different perspectives that we have represented, I wanted to start with a really general question to answer from your own vantage point. which is what motivates individual donors, especially DAF holders, to invest in scholarships as part of their philanthropic strategy. And Madeline, I'm going to start with you, as I know you have a personal perspective on this.
Thank you, Jen. Yeah, I think we've heard a lot of conversations about what it means to meet this moment. And I think as a self-labeled next gen philanthropist, getting really creative with how to activate your philanthropic capital. And I've always been curious, I think people are learning or not always aware of the fact of how creative you can be with your DAF and how you choose to give, that it's not just a park and give. And so for me, it was really this opportunity of thinking of a sense of place. So my priorities as a donor, which are all, as we know, very individual and specific. I do a lot of my donations in Boulder County. And so for me, these issues of food security and supporting local organizations is really important for me. And having that close tie to Abigail at Scholarship America, it kind of triggered from an event. The withholding of SNAP created this opportunity for us to partner, which I always seek out too, and thinking of how can we meet this moment and serve the immediate needs of our community, but also move the needle for the systemic change and systems change work. And so for me, it allowed me as a donor to focus on what I do best is I bring the resources and the values and think about impact, and then partnering with experts like Scholarship America to implement and see where are the needs, how might we coordinate this and serve the needs of the students, because a lot of times, that those $1,000 can make the difference between graduation and dropping out. So it's just yeah, I think for me, it's just finding those opportunities for how can I think creatively about what I care about, how to find those experts to partner with to create the systems change that we're looking for as donors. So for me, it was a great alignment with Scholarship America.
It's amazing. And Linda, I want to go over to you because you work with a range of individual donors. And so, from your vantage point, like how are donors thinking about scholarships, or how should they be thinking about scholarships as part of their charitable giving portfolio? And what themes are you seeing in terms of that donor interest?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And although I've been working with donors and working in philanthropy for a while at Fidelity Charitable, I feel like the new kid on the block when it comes to scholarships, or a new kid on the block on the panel, because it's only been in the last year or two where I've now had several donors approach me about scholarships. And the incredible thing that I've noticed is that scholarships really tap into what's personal for people, the whether it's the experiences or the opportunities or the people that have touched their own lives. And I've had everything from a family where the now grown children were first generation college students and wanting to give back and ensure other young people had access to education, to a family that wanted to give back to the employees at their company that had been with them for so long and ensuring that those employees and their families had opportunities for higher education, to a family touched by a specific illness and wanting to help and support others impacted by that illness. And even, a donor that had a dear friend pass away and wanted to name a scholarship in that friend's memory and ensure others could pursue a similar vocation to her dear friend. And so I think just it really is that personal, tapping into what is personal for people. And I encourage those of you working with donors or those of you who are potential donors yourselves to tap into, are there opportunities that you've had or people that have touched your lives, and are there ways to give back and have impact with others in the future in honor of those experiences and opportunities and people?
That's awesome. As I'm definitely learning, and I was like writing down notes from what you were saying, but and that really resonates from what we do at Imaginable Futures. That what we sort of take a systems approach to education. But what I've found when we talk about education is something that most people have a universal experience in, but it is so personal. And I think that what you were saying really resonates about why like education and scholarships in particular are sort of powerful connections for individual donors. Fernando, I want to turn over to you because in your vantage point at National Philanthropic Trust, you have insight into the broad trends shaping DAF giving in general. And this is really a two-part question. How have you seen donors leverage DAF giving, particularly how their charitable dollars are deployed over time? And then related to this conversation, how might that affect grants to organizations that are administering scholarship funds?
Sure, yeah, and I appreciate the conversation because we talk about the motivations, but I think that the donor behavior in particular really comes into play when it comes to donor advised funds, or frankly, many other charitable vehicles that would be leveraged for scholarship giving or supporting educational causes in as well. The donor advised fund space has grown rapidly over the past 10 or so years. They've been around in the tax code since the 1930s. However, since the 90s is really where they really started to pick up as an alternative to a lot of foundation giving. So when we think about the overall velocity of funds into donor advised funds, that velocity is maintained on the flows out of donor advised funds. If you're familiar with the DAF report is something that National Philanthropic Trust has been publishing for many years. And just this year, we've handed that over and started funding the DAF Research Collaborative doing that same work. What's unique now, though, is the DAF report itself. It has been studying the DAF industry for many years, looking at the DAF landscape in general. But now the DAF Research Collaborative is diving a bit more deep into the waters, if you will, of the donor behavior. How are donors leveraging the donor advised fund? And then on the other side of things, there are people studying how are charities going about cultivating these dollars. So I'll speak a little bit to some of that here, but with regard to donor advised funds, just I think it's helpful to know that about between 22 and 25% of DAF assets are flowing out of donor advised funds on an annual basis. And that's not necessarily saying on every account level that's happening, but that's an average across the board. Where that really comes into play is really neat with and I don't work for the DAF Research Collaborative, but I leverage their data all the time because it's super interesting to understand the mindset of donors because they categorize them into what they call tubs, tanks, and towers. And so they think that there are many donors who are going to open a donor advised fund, and they may use a combination of this for different segments of their giving, where they're going to the tubs are short-term flows, usually within a year or 2 years, the assets are flowing out of their donor advised funds. The tanks, that's usually within 2 to 10 years that the funds are flowing out, and then 10 plus years for those towers. These are those donors that may be looking at their legacy, their own legacy when it comes to supporting a scholarship or supporting the charitable causes they would like to support from the donor advised fund to have a plan forward. Now, again, I said they very well could be leveraging a combination of all three of these, and they also may be leveraging these in all three ways in a proactive or reactive way. So they may already know they want to support a scholarship program through the communications department at their alma mater. They may also know they'd like to go about funding something with their house of worship, but they can really be planful and also very easily modify those plans from a strategic standpoint when it comes to more reactive types of grant making, because we know that a lot of times I personally have about 20% of my DAF set aside for those reactive asks from my friends, family, and my alma mater when they come knocking on an annual basis at this point. What that really underscores for me, though, is when we're talking with fundraisers or people who are administering scholarships or scholarship programs, when you start to appeal to the donors themselves from a planned giving lens, but also a major gifts lens, and kind of combining those two, because DAFs are both. When you think about it, they are giving while living and then giving in the end. Where that comes for in the scholarship funding arena. It's just really interesting to think that you can help to start segment those who are supporting your scholarship programs into those who hold DAFs and those who do not, because those who do hold DAFs very likely have much more in their DAF to support your program going forward. And we'll speak to I think that as we get into this conversation, that Ashley's going to touch a bit more on some of the actually all of us might be talking more about the tips and tricks and traps that we might run into when it comes to funding scholarship programs. But behaviorally, the donor advised fund is robust and the assets are flowing very, very quickly, whether that be to scholarship programs or other charities. We can definitely start to cultivate these relationships to make sure that they're supporting these particular programs that you all care about so much.
That's amazing. I already know that I want to bookmark that report.
Yes.
That's wonderful. Okay, so now we've talked about sort of the what brings people to what brings donors to the table on scholarship and DAF funding. Let's talk about the challenges and the misconceptions and how to address them. So, Ashley, I want to bring you into the conversation because I know that the Pittsburgh Foundation is one of the largest and oldest community foundations and operates under an endowed philanthropic model. How has your scholarship program evolved over time, and what key challenges have emerged along the way, and how have you addressed them? And then also, as our residence compliance guru, I want to encourage you to add in some of that wisdom as well into your answer.
Sure, sure. Thanks, Jen. Hi, everyone. Okay, so to give a little context, the Pittsburgh Foundation is over 80 years old. We steward about 2,800 permanently endowed funds, as Jen noted, roughly 400 of which are scholarship funds. So that is a very robust program in the community foundation space. And because we operate under this endowment model, these funds exist into perpetuity. This means we are still carrying out donor intent that was established in the 1940s through today. And as we all know, higher education has changed dramatically during that period, and especially over these last 30 years. So our core challenge has been this. How do we honor donor intent while ensuring scholarships are truly impactful for today's students and tomorrow's students, for that matter? Historically, we became a strong regional partner because of our model. We had a $25,000 fund minimum and a model that allowed donors to participate directly in the review process, and that worked well for a really long time. But over time, that became more difficult to sustain, and some funds had criteria, some of our funds had criteria that no longer aligned with workforce realities. Many of those funds were single-year, $1,000 awards, merit scholarships, to be exact. They're generous awards, but not necessarily trajectories changing. And managing hundreds of customized funds became increasingly complex and costly, particularly as legislative changes limited donor involvement. And that's what we can talk about a little bit more in a little while. So about 10 years ago, we moved our applications online. That process strengthened student access while improving safeguards around confidentiality and compliance. That led to a bigger question for us. Improving process is important, but are we maximizing impact? So we assembled a cross-departmental team to investigate, and the data for us was very clear. Students with the greatest financial need were often receiving the least scholarship support. Meanwhile, high-performing students were frequently already receiving substantial institutional aid. And we learned that relatively small financial gaps often determine whether a student persists or leaves higher education. So we evolved. We increased our fund minimums from $25,000 to $250,000 for those funds with donor-involved committees and $100,000 for funds without a donor-involved committee. We required multi-year awards, and as a result of these two shifts, our new funds now provide awards starting at $10,000 over 4 years, and they prioritize financial need with only 1 or 2 additional criteria. We also created pathways to amend older funds and modernize committee structures. And we increasingly recommend to prospects that a donor advised fund can be a great instrument to provide scholarship support. Additionally, we partnered with Scholarship America, initially just to help relieve administrative pressure, but it has become much more than that. In the past 4 years, our applicants have secured more than 600 additional scholarships, totaling nearly $7 million from other scholarship providers. And this is nearly quadrupling their opportunities and significantly reducing debt. So I often say this leverage partnership with Scholarship America is akin to the difference between shopping at your local department store versus the Mall of America. Access changes outcomes. Now, The hardest part of this evolution hasn't been structural, it's been relational. Scholarship donors care deeply. Many have personal stories behind their funds and long-held expectations, and our role is to navigate those relationships with empathy. Our amazing donor services team starts by listening. Why did you create this scholarship? Who were you hoping to impact? And then we work towards solutions with the donor, not for them. We share clear data about costs, unmet need, and compliance. We acknowledge that change can feel significant, and sometimes it takes several conversations. We've learned that going slow allows us to move faster towards durable solutions. What has made this easier is our very strong cross-departmental alignment around honoring donor intent, ensuring compliance, maximizing student impact, and educating donors along the way. And because we're aligned internally, we can show up consistently and confidently. Ultimately, our evolution has been about this. It's been about moving from stewarding scholarships in perpetuity to stewarding opportunity in perpetuity, not just ensuring that the funds last forever, but ensuring that their impact does. And then from a compliance perspective, the most important thing to know is that donors can absolutely recommend grants from their DAFs so long as those dollars are not earmarked for an individual and the donor is not involved in the selection process. There are, of course, many, many more rules for scholarship funds, which do award to individuals and can involve the donor. I think that answers the question. Happy to get more into
Jenn,
compliance, if so called.
Jen, do you mind if I just kind of jump in with something in particular that this comes up a lot, and I think we could all agree that first and foremost, I will say not every DAF provider is a Pittsburgh Foundation, where the Pittsburgh Foundation has scholarship funds and programs and things that many community foundations do. Many of the nationals do not have scholarship programs that we administer. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not funding them through community foundations or through Scholarship America and others. One thing I think that is always worth pointing out is that when donors give from a DAF to a scholarship program, that the donors are relinquishing control over any of the funds that they are donating to on the front end, but then they are recommending those grants to the scholarship fund or the nonprofit that may be administering that particular scholarship fund. And that's just helpful to frame the donor's mind around that. And that the grants are to support scholarship programs. They may be approved as long as the donors, the DAF advisors, and any related parties don't control the selection, as Ashley was mentioning. The one thing that I will tell you is this is one thing I try to put a very fine point on, is that selection committee really matters in this piece of the process. Because if that selection committee is 5 people, one of whom is the donor, 4 are all unrelated to the donor, that can work. But if it is 5 people and there are 4 of them who are all they're all family members, that majority aspect of that is what the IRS is really going to scrutinize as part of that particular grant. So I wanted to mention that.
And you're talking about for a scholarship fund for this, right, Fernando?
That's
not
right.
The DAF. Oh yeah, scholarship. There are so many rules. I have pages of rules when it comes
pages and pages.
to those.
The IRS.
So I don't think we have enough time for that. But yes,
100%. Yes, but just knowing and being sure that we are all kind of going into the conversation that when a DAF is funding the scholarship program itself, that's where we have lots of checks and balances to go through to be sure that that's a permissible grant from an IRS standpoint, because everyone wants to maintain the charitable status of the DAF sponsor, but also wants to protect the donor's deduction on the front end as well. So,
Yeah, and you're sort of already going here, Fernando, so I'm just gonna segue with us right in there, which is like the misconceptions, the traps, the things that people may stop people from even like doing the DAF scholarship relationship. So Linda, I know you have some thoughts on this too to add into the conversation, but like what are some of those misconceptions that that donors are bringing to it? And Madeline, also, I'm sure that you can even speak from your experience as well.
So I think Ashley and Fernando really sort of gave a good preview on some of this, but I will say I think the number one misconception is that unless a donor is working directly with a university or another school, that they can't, they cannot utilize their DAF funds to do some sort of broader community scholarship. And so I think, really to myth bust that, it's the role of us as DAF providers for those, nonprofits like Scholarship America and community foundations that are administering scholarships. And the role of philanthropic advisors. I think we really need to do some myth busting that there is an opportunity to, make through your donor advised fund, make a grant to one of these intermediaries that can then, administer the scholarship on your behalf. So real opportunity there. I think the other thing that, Fernando and Ashley are also highlighting, maybe not a misconception, but education that's needed on the donor front is to help donors understand that there are guardrails in place. And, they may not be able to handpick who receives the scholarships. And that can sometimes be hard to hear. But they can really set the criteria that the independent review panel will then use to pick scholarship recipients. And certainly, that's because of IRS regulations, but also in designing these, we want to be fair and equitable. We want to make sure that anyone who takes the time to apply has a fair shot. And that is why some of these guardrails are in place.
Can weigh in a little bit. Absolutely, all of those things. I don't think, it's not an either or, it's a yes and. And I think for me, I had this idea, you don't know what you don't know. And so I think it's the job of, to your point, advisors, of community members, of having great contacts and partners like America to kind of figure out. And I go back to that question of what's really important to you as a donor, and then what impact are you seeking? Because yes, I gave up some control over, where the scholarships go, but at the same time, my goal was impact on our community and getting fast, flexible emergency funding to students. And so in that, it's again, I go back to what's the reason for the giving, and then how are you activating and trusting your partners? That's just such an important piece. And then I think too, these educating other donors, because I've informed other donors of the same thing. I didn't know this existed for a bit until I met Scholarship America. I thought scholarships were onerous, that you had to go through university or through, I had an operating company, we went through that. For me, it was really easy to partner with Scholarship America. I let them know what my priorities were. I let them know I am not an expert. I am not a scholarship administrator. So I could trust them. We built that, co-created what this is, and then got it out really fast to the community, because that was my motivation. We needed fast funding for students who lost their SNAP benefits and were in that critical moment of, do I pick groceries or can I make it to class? So it's, again, going back to partnering. I think of partnering, don't reinvent the wheel. Find people you trust, create your team, like who are your board, advisory board, and then go back to that question of impact that you're seeking.
Amazing. I think Ashley, you said something, I wrote it down, that was like, it's not about the funds lasting into perpetuity, but about the impact lasting into perpetuity. And I think that shift is like just so crucial and important. So I think we got a few Q&A questions when people registered, so we have sort of a sense of what those who are coming to the conversation are interested in hearing more about. And some of them are related, Fernando, to what you said earlier, which was really about like, how are charities cultivating these dollars, the DAF donors? Like how are we sort of have in the ecosystem, there's the donors, the advisors, the folks who sort of are administering these things, and then the folks who are trying to get those dollars. So maybe you can speak to a little bit more about how that other side of the equation has been factoring into this conversation.
Yeah, and it's a very It's a very common question, most certainly, because I think that when many people start to put their eyes on the DAF industry and start to think, okay, well, I see that over there. How do I get over there and take some of that and get some of that to support the causes that I'm looking to? And it's a very strange, not a very simple answer is these are the same donors you are already cultivating and the same people that are very well already looking to make an impact in their local communities. So if you view the DAF as simply the vehicle through which they are doing it, then it kind of turns the mirror back on, okay, well, this is the exact same fundraising effort that I have had in the past. Now, with some differences, obviously. When we think about, as I was mentioning earlier, when you look and you receive support from a donor advised fund holder, that signals 100% of the time that they have more in their DAF. The average DAF size, I believe, the last time we looked was about $75,000, $80,000. That's average of the thousands and thousands and thousands of DAFs that are out there. So when you get that $500 commitment or a $500 grant from a donor advised fund, finding a way to then go cultivate more from that donor, whether that becomes now an annual recurring gift from the donor advised fund, or perhaps being able to name that scholarship fund or the university in some way, shape, or form to become a charitable beneficiary to the donor advised fund upon that donor's passing. That's where the idea of major gift and planned giving tactics will come into play for the assets that are currently held in donor advised funds. But one other piece that we find that is very helpful is those who are actively fundraising for their scholarship efforts or for other efforts is on their website or on their appeals, signaling that donor advised funds are very easy and simple ways to give to your organization by including your tax ID number right there on the appeal, if that's appropriate, and also showing recommend your grant from your donor advised fund, give them that very specific language, and even suggest a recurring grant from your donor advised fund there. So a lot of just kind of walking down the line and then realizing, oh, I can take this messaging 3 steps forward, and it goes a long way. It really does.
That's awesome. And I know this was a question that came up a lot in the from the pre-registration. Ashley, Linda, Madeline, do you have any other thoughts about the other side of the funding scenario and any advice for folks who are trying to cultivate donor advised funds or who are trying to connect with advisors? Like what kind of advice would you give to those folks? I see Ashley's thinking, so maybe I'll start with Linda if you have any ideas.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think I don't know if I have anything additional to share in addition to what Fernando said on this one. I think he sort of raised some of the really important points here. Um, so I'll pass it on to my colleagues in case they have anything to share on this one.
Actually, I don't know if I don't want to take it from you, but I think from a donor perspective, it's, start with the connection, not the ask. Um, it's because things are so personalized, it's understanding what do people care about and how, knowing they have a DAF, how might you activate that, knowing what the interests are, what the values are, and lead with that. I think it's so with donors, it's all about the connection and the story. We've heard a lot about that today, but then also the execution is understanding what are the possibilities to activate your philanthropic capital to see the results that you want and the impact you want to have on your communities. So that's my little ask.
That's awesome. Well, I'm also going to take my moderator's privilege to ask a question that I'm very interested to know the answer. It's sort of percolated throughout the conversation, which are like changing trends in donor expectations around impact, around things that are maybe affecting donor behavior. So, Linda, you mentioned that in the last year, a lot more people are coming to you and asking about scholarships. And Ashley, you mentioned something around like legislative changes that may be shaping like some of this donor behavior. I'm very curious to like from you all's perspective over the last, few years, how has donor either expectations or donor behavior changed, and what would you say is behind that? So Linda, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, this is all for me anecdotal. I don't have sort of evidence of this, but one thing I just think about is that, there's at a time we're at a time where there's just so much need in the world, and I think people are searching for ways, people feel overwhelmed by that, donors feel overwhelmed by that, and want to figure out a way they can really have impact. And I think scholarships provide that opportunity to really see, where those dollars are making the difference in the lives of people. And it was a few months ago, I sat down for lunch with one of the families I worked on a scholarship program with, and they felt so, proud and excited to share that, one of the students they'd funded was now going to be able to pursue a degree in pre-med, and another was interested in nursing, and someone else was interested in going into the accounting field. And I could just sort of see their eyes light up. And it really actually, as a philanthropic advisor, made me light up to see the ways that, one small, it wasn't, even the largest scholarship, but, how meaningful that was for each of those students to receive that scholarship. And I think that's really the opportunity right now that donors are seeking around having impact.
That must have been wonderful to hear and get that little boost. Ashley, yeah, I want to turn it back over to you because there are some like changes with how people can navigate
Sure.
this landscape.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the biggest legislative change that I was referring to is the Pension Protection Act in 2006. So that's 20 years ago at this point, but it takes time for big organizations like ours to kind of catch up and update processes and whatnot. But I would say that change is what put all of these guide rails in place, and it started slapping hands who well-meaning hands who were wanting to give out scholarship dollars. And so I think as a result of that legislation, we have certainly had to tighten up our scholarship funds. I think everyone else has had to do the same. What you used to be able to do, you can no longer do. And so, when we have donors that come to us, we've always been able to offer both things. Like Fernando said, we can offer a scholarship fund, we can offer a DAF, we can offer lots of different fund types. And so generally when they would come in the door and they would lead with scholarship, we would head down that path with them. Okay, let's talk about scholarship fund. Now we don't head down that path immediately. We talk more about what's the impact that you want, what do you see happening here? Because a donor advised fund is often a better solution. And it has a lot to do with all of those restrictions. It makes the funds costly. It makes them clunky. It makes them challenging to award, over a very long time. Now, we put a lot of things in place that have improved that, but nothing is as flexible as a donor advised fund. So that's sort of what we've seen. And it's been, really over the last 10 years, 5-10 years. But we still have, people are still just as interested. We just talk about different tools now.
That's an interesting reframing too, that, it's really like, what is the structure that you're like for most donors, I imagine it's really like the impact they want to see, not necessarily the structure that they want to have.
Well, I think they come in thinking that the structure is important. And so, when you start talking about impact and what's associated with that particular structure, then maybe it loses some of its luster. Maybe not. Depends on the donor.
I'll also mention this has kind of gotten my gears turning a little bit too. I think there are so many differences generationally as well. I think that the younger generations understand what impact they want, and they want to implement it in the most efficient way possible, and they want it to just happen. And a lot of that can happen very simply by leveraging organizations like Scholarship America and the Donor Advised Fund as an overlay to that for funding potentially with them and the others who would like to do the same thing. If we think back to those who used to default to private foundations, just in a general sense, a lot of people mid-century and so on, a foundation was the way to go. And generationally, they're even, if they're no longer involved, they've passed it on to future generations. Those future generations have wound that down into a donor advised fund to create some efficiencies for as Ashley was mentioning, it's a lot more nimble, a lot more cost effective, and it can just be implemented in a grant making fashion to a point where I think when we talk to appealing to those donors, it's also a very different appeal generationally, because they may be looking to measure, some may be looking to measure more impact today, but most certainly impact and efficiency for the early stages of it, but the impact ongoing. So the conversations are tailored to the ask in that case, and I think the mission, their vision, their values, it's included in all of them, but the execution is different. So speaking directly to the kind of looking at how they'll execute and think about how to appeal on the front end is helpful for sure.
Oh, I feel like we need a part two on the generational differences of giving. That would be so fascinating. So I think maybe in our last 5 minutes here, if we could just do a round robin around and everybody giving their top piece of advice to donors or those working with donors who want to create meaningful student-centered impact without creating an administrative burden. So Ashley, I'm going to start with you, and then Fernando, Linda, and then we'll close with how we started with Madeline.
All right. So I would say start with the student experience. Ask yourselves, ask your client, will this requirement make it easier or harder for a student to access support? Simple eligibility criteria, flexible dollars, and fewer documentation hurdles dramatically increase impact. And if you want to minimize the administrative lift and cost, work through existing scholarship infrastructure or flexible vehicles like DAFs, rather than building something that's highly customized from scratch. That's it. That's all I got.
Great.
Fernando.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I will just say, as a first generation high school graduate and a first generation college student, scholarships are very near and dear to me and the path that I've had professionally. So I'm loving being on this conversation and hope that it can just create impact itself. I Mine is very, very simple. Ask lots of questions. I want all the people on the scholarship side to ask lots of questions, those who are looking to establish funds to ask a lot of questions, and encourage their donors and those who would like to support them to ask all the right questions. Because the last thing we want, the one thing I find is that the more educated somebody is on the topic, that it releases the tension of making people feel like they need to control every step of it along the way. The helpers are out there. We're on this call. There are others as well. We're ready to help and we're ready to educate and ready just to ride alongside you all to bring these dollars to the causes that people are trying to affect right now on today, giving while living, and then also in the future. There's a long road ahead for many, many centuries of the world. We want to make sure we're funding all of it, or someone is at some point.
Awesome. Linda.
So, well, I'd say it's for those donors that have a donor advised fund and are interested in scholarships, check in with your donor advised fund sponsor, whether it's one of us here on the panel or another donor advised fund, to find out more about how they've worked with scholarship nonprofits in the past to administer these scholarships. There are ways to do this, and people are using their donor advised funds to do scholarships. And then I would say engage one of those nonprofit scholarship administrators and, echoing you, Fernando, ask lots of questions. These folks in this space, in the nonprofit space, have been working with a number of different, whether it's individual donors or corporations or other people to administer these programs. So they know the pitfalls, they know what makes a scholarship successful, and really learn from them. Just a shout out, I know since Scholarship America is convening us, they've been on this call today, they've been a great partner and have so much great advice, as do some of their colleagues who are in this space. So make sure to engage those nonprofits and learn from the great work they've been doing.
Amazing. Bring us home, Madeline.
Yeah, I'm going to echo a lot of what everyone has said here. It's again going back to lead with impact. Get really clear on what the impact you want to have with your giving, your values, and then partner, don't build. Really figure out, find places like Scholarship America, partner with NPT, with your DAF holders, with your foundations, and figure out how do we execute this? Because as donors, we don't have to be the experts on everything. Lean on the experts to have the impact, so you can focus on deploying the resources and doing the work that you want to do as a donor. So I think just leaning on that. And then, you can always customize your involvement. There's so many options, so get really creative with what you can do with your DAF.
You sort of so teed me up because I think this partnering, not building, is so crucial. And we see that in institutional philanthropy as well. Like Linda, what you said around, the I just forgot what you said, but it was brilliant. And but really making sure that that you don't have to feel like you're alone, and there are people out there who have experience. Scholarship America has been a great partner to us on the institutional philanthropy side. So there are folks out there who like know like sort of both what sides of the conversation people are on and can give that helpful advice to people who are looking to make an impact.
And that
So
Pittsburgh native Mr. Rogers once said, "Find the helpers," because we're out here for sure. And that was a hat tip to you, Ashley.
yeah, wonderful. So
Thoroughly enjoyed.
Matt, do I turn it back over to you to close us out here?
Sure, yeah. Thank you very much, Jenn, and all of our panelists for a great conversation. I know we just scratched the surface of this issue. There's so much more to be discussed. We will be publishing a transcript as well as a recording of this session on the Scholarship America blog, hopefully tomorrow. And we'll put that on our LinkedIn and on our Facebook. Would love to take to those social channels to continue the conversation, answer the questions we didn't get to, and talk about next steps that make sense for all of us. So with that, we've beaten 3:45 by 30 some seconds. So thank you for staying a little bit of extra time. Thank you again to Imaginable Futures for sponsoring this webinar, and our appreciation to everyone on the panel and everyone who attended. We hope you had a wonderful time, learned a lot, and we will be sending out information about our next partner convening webinars in the next couple of weeks. Hope to see you there. Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon.